but I guess the interpreters don't need to be muted because they'll have to talk.
Indeed, I think our interpreters can stay unmuted for now.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name's
Good
Ulavan.
morning, Ulavan. Thank you for joining us. I think we're getting started right now. So we'll give everyone a moment to come in from the waiting room, and then we'll get started momentarily.
I see the Vietnamese and Lao and Khmer translators are still muted.
Well, they'll unmute themselves, I'm sure, momentarily, but thank you for pointing that out, Ian. So good afternoon, or I guess good morning to those who are calling in from Southeast Asia. Good evening to those who are calling in from the East Coast of the United States, and good late afternoon to those calling in from the West Coast. Thank you for joining us for our discussion today on Where's the Water? Mekong Wet Season 2024. I see we are still getting people trickling in from the waiting room, so we're going to give people another minute or so to come in, and then we'll get started in earnest. So please just hang tight. All right, well, I believe that we're probably still going to get a few more people coming in, but I will go ahead and just get started since we do have a few logistical notes to take care of just at the beginning of today's call. So welcome everybody to today's seasonal update event on Where's the Water? Mekong Wet Season 2024. We're still getting some people trickling in from the waiting room. But while we are waiting to get started on sort of the substantive discussion for today, I do want to just remind everybody that we do have local language translation available. So if anybody would like to listen in Burmese, Chinese, Khmer, Lao, Thai, or Vietnamese, then you're welcome to use the interpretation feature. It's available at the bottom of the Zoom screen. If you click More, and then look for the little globe symbol that says interpretation, and then you can select the language that you would prefer to listen in for the rest of the discussion tonight. So please go ahead and take advantage of those features if you can, and you are also very welcome to submit questions in local language to the Q&A function throughout the discussion, and we can translate them using Google Translate or with the help of the translators to promote a truly active discussion. So with that stated, we'll go ahead and get started with sort of the substance for today. My name is Courtney Weatherby. I'm the Deputy Director of the Southeast Asia Program and a Fellow with our Energy, Water, and Sustainability Program at the Stimson Center. And as I think most of you know, since you're joining our discussion today, our team at the Stimson Center, in collaboration with Eyes on Earth and many other friends and colleagues, use satellite data, remote sensing, and on-the-ground data from gauges run by the Mekong River Commission and others to track how dams are affecting the Mekong River system. We monitor about 55 dams in the basin on a near real-time basis with weekly updates, and we put out a series of additional and targeted analysis and references to help everyone track what's going on. So this is really one of our 2 seasonal updates that we do every year for the wet and the dry seasons to share analysis and trends that we observed from the most recent season, as well as do a little bit of forecasting for the coming season. So for today's discussion, we're going to have a really interactive conversation with the co-leads for the Mekong Dam Monitor, Brian Eiler and Alan Deceased, about how dams and climate have affected the Mekong River system over the last dry season, and then get a little bit of a sort of a prediction of what might come, looking at the current situation in the basin and some of the climate forecasts for this current and emerging wet season. And then following that regular presentation by our team, we're going to be welcoming some additional insights and comments from 3 colleagues who have very kindly joined us today for an interactive discussion. Dr. Ian Baird, Dr. Ulavan Sinsampan, and Shrelak Mek, who are all going to share insights from their own research and their own on-the-ground engagement and analysis to explore what river levels, climate trends, and what needs there are for things like early warning. So before we turn things over to the conversation, I do just want to share or remind people of 2 sort of important updates that we've had happen for the Mekong Dam Monitor recently. One of those is that, as many of you may have seen, we did get a new website and domain set up. So we are now located at mekongmonitor.stimson.org, and I will share that link in the chat for everybody, just so that you can all access it as you choose to do so after the event tonight. And the other factor that I wanted to just announce is that we've also recently put out a major new contribution to the conversation, which is the All Dams in the Mekong map. We regularly put out some of these maps to kind of show a sort of visual snapshot of what's going on in the basin in terms of dam development. And this new map that we just put out, which was created by my colleague Reagan Kwan, really details the current status of all the dams that are completed and under construction in the basin. And it's added a large number of particularly irrigation reservoirs that weren't previously in the map. So we can now see that there are over 740 dams across the entirety of the Mekong River system, which is a lot more than the 55 dams that our team monitors on a real-time basis and or near real-time basis. And that really highlights that there's an opportunity and a need for further and more localized analysis of the impacts on local communities and ecosystems from all of these projects cumulatively. So with that noted, I'll drop the link to that into the chat for everyone as well. But with that noted, and without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to my colleagues, Brian Eiler, who's the director of our Southeast Asia program and Energy, Water, and Sustainability program at the Simpson Center, and Alan Basiste, who's the president of Eyes on Earth. They are the co-leads for Mekong Dam Monitor. They are on the same screen right now because they are going to collaboratively give this presentation. And Brian and Alan, over to you guys.
And it's the first time we've been together physically to do something like this, right, Alan?
It's quite exciting. In the days of remote, it's nice to sit down and have bread together, and hope we get to do it with friends in Southeast Asia soon as well.
And Alan and I speak to each other every day, but we haven't seen each other in person since we were in Thailand last July. So it's a great opportunity that this webinar can bring us together.
Yeah, and a lot of other people as well.
All right, well, let's get into it. I'll share the screen here. Take it away, Alan.
Well, that's the lower basin, and it highlights the Tonle Sap during the wet season and how it's draining out. And you can see on basically very top left, you can see how time is looping through. So here's the beginning at the end of the wet season, and then you see
which wet season?
2023 moving into 2024, so the most recent one. And what we found most interesting is how water moves out of the Tonle Sap Basin and down into the delta. And you can actually see a lead time right here as water's moving into the delta and then being used as irrigation, which it was extensively during the dry season. And you can look over to the right, and you can see at the very high resolution, you can see how it's draining out. You see the water all around the basin, and then you see it disappearing over the same period of time, because these two maps are working and showing that they tell the same story. Yeah. One is with microwave and one is with SAR, and it's nice when data supports each other. And then we have confidence that we're seeing something real.
And the one thing that I found interesting was that the Vietnam Delta has this effect of taking on water from the contraction of the Tonle Sap Lake into the late wet season months, but then all that wetness disappears in about January, February. We're going to see that wetness come back during the dry season, but we'll come back to that.
Mm-hmm. So this actually is a nice synopsis of the beginning of the dry season. So we've got January, February, and March, and on top we have temperature. And it's really uncommon to see these kind of extreme temperatures week after week in the lower basin. You're seeing 2-3 degrees Celsius, even more in parts of the Tonle Sap Basin. And you're seeing it in the Cardamom Mountains, you're seeing it going up into Laos, and you're seeing it in not as extensively, but you're seeing it also up in the Northeast Kingdoms, Northeast Thailand. So these are the concerns that we have during a climate change. Is it shifting? And if so, what are the trends? And what we look at persistent patterns, and there you see it. 3 months of persistent patterns. And if you look at wetness down below, Brian, if you can
Yep.
lift it up a little bit, I can see better. We're seeing that in January, there was, things were actually relatively normal, also, although drying out in some parts of Cambodia. You're seeing the dryness get more amplified in February. March, you're seeing a concern, but April was the most dominant extreme anomalies. And you're seeing that the lower basin during this dry season was severely hot and severely dry. The only place where there was a fair amount of water was up in the headwaters. And you're seeing that in January, a little bit in February, March, and even in April. So that's where the water is. And that's where the water needs to be coming down into the lower basin.
There is some excess water down here throughout the entirety of the dry season.
Yeah, so where's that coming from? It's being pulled out of the river and brought onto the land. So it's basically fresh water that should be flushing out to the ocean that's being sprinkled all across the landscape. And you can see it visually right there. That's fresh water coming down the Mekong. And that pulse that you saw coming out of the Tonle Sap Basin fed it. And then you're seeing that basically the river itself is maintaining it, and they're drawing it out to such an extent that in the very lower part, the southern peninsula, there's basically no water getting. It's completely devoid of water. And the irrigated fields are being basically swamped.
Well, and one of the reasons why we pointed at this was we were scratching our heads over the course of the dry season as to, most of the rest of the basin was extremely dry, having this very red map drought is what we saw on those previous maps. But Vietnam's delta was green and blue. And it just happened that our team was in the delta at that time, traveling around doing research. And I took the photo that you see there on the bottom left to show that while much of Cambodia was experiencing extreme drought, the paddy fields in March were full in most of the delta with water. And that's what you're seeing on the right map. It's happening alongside of extreme drought in Cà Mau and Bac Lieu and other provinces along the coast, where freshwater irrigation cannot penetrate due to salinity intrusion and other issues. But Vietnam had this interesting pattern this year of being able to irrigate while the rest of the basin around it was very dry.
Particularly the lower basin. Yep. And so that's of course affecting saltwater intrusion, because if you're pulling out the fresh water, that allows the salt water to work further inland. So there's cost to it.
I'm going to try and make this smaller so we can see things better now.
Okay. And what Brian has brought up now is we're looking at the dry season. The blue line is basically the long-term 1960 to 2007, so average, the long-term average before a lot of dams were built and natural flow was largely intact. And then you're looking at what happened after that period, when major dams came into being, such as Siawan and Nuozhadu and others as well. And you're seeing basically the flow during the dry season went up substantially. Well, where did the water come from? It came from the dams. It's not very complicated to figure that out. So you see all this excess water, but what you're also seeing—
And that's the red line. Right?
That's the red line, the one that's rising well above what was normal, the blue line. And then down below, you see the two most recent years basically superimposed, and they look pretty normal. Which is interesting. We actually predicted that this year was going to be largely normal because the reservoirs weren't very full. And so there's only a limited amount of water that could be released during the dry season. And that indeed was true. But you're also seeing that even with those dam releases, you're still seeing that it's actually a real normal flow for dry season.
Kind of like those peaks, those up and downs that we see on the gold line and the darker blue line. I mean, those aren't normal.
No, those are definitely dam releases, and frequently they're ones that are just opened up and then shut down again, and it's completely abnormal.
So for this past dry season of 2024, we watch for these sudden releases of water that can create those peaks or sudden valleys. And we issue early warnings when the level of the river downstream will change more than 50 centimeters or more. We only did that 8 times over the course of this last wet season, when the level of the river rose or fell within a 24-hour period, so much that it made a drastic change to the level. Compare that to 2022, we issued 22 warnings over the course of that dry season. In the month of April 2022 alone, we issued 8 early warnings. This year, only 8.
Yeah, that's a third.
Sure.
I mean, so it shows that the releases were there, and they certainly are unnatural, and they have an impact on the ecology, and they have impact on basically the people that live along the river for sure, and the natural systems that depend upon the wetlands. But they were a lot less than the previous year for sure.
So we've been giving these predictions. We made that prediction in December during our last Where's the Water webinar, and for 2 dry seasons in a row, they've essentially come true. Now we're going to look at why. We're going to look at specifically what happened to flow, not just at Changsan, Thailand, but all the way down through the basin, and how dams impacted flow of the river. Some of you might be following along with the development of the Tuoba Dam in China. We were the first to find and to announce on social media and other methods that this dam indeed was filling. That means its construction has been completed enough that the reservoir can begin to fill. And as soon as a reservoir begins to fill, it's going to accrue impacts that will, hurt the downstream or affect the downstream. So this is the 12th dam in China now to be completed. And all the data suggests that it has, when we reported on this in May, it was nearly 80% full, but now in June, we believe it's entirely full or very close to it. So is that something that's contributing to the lower than normal levels, or I'm sorry, not lower than normal, but lower than the last few years levels? We did some analysis to think about that. Here you can see a picture of the reservoir filling, and you're going to see that it mostly filled during the month of April and May. That's the big kind of explosion of water, pulse of water that's filling that reservoir up. And we're just seeing a small portion of the reservoir now. Now in Vietnam, people were complaining of low river levels that were causing drought. And I heard some folks say, well, it must be China's dam that's doing this. Well, was it? If that dam filled up to its total capacity, which is 1.12 cubic kilometers, we tacked that on to observed flow and ran that down the course of the river. So flow would have been 7.5% higher at Changsan this year without this dry season, without that dam filling. That's significant, right? 7.5% is very measurable and very noticeable. But then that impact decreases as you move downstream, as more tributaries are contributing water and dams on those tributaries are contributing water. So much so that by the time the impacts hit Cambodia over the course of the dry season, there's about a 2% flow reduction. So whether that's significant or not, I think that's something we can argue about, but it's definitely not huge. And so the driver of the really low levels is likely not this particular dam. There must be something else happening. And we think most of that has to do with the lack of releases from hydropower production over the course of the dry season, particularly low releases from China, which are the purple releases. Now, we have to remember that dams store water during the wet season, so they bring down the pulse, they bring down the peak, and there are a lot of negative ecological consequences of that. And then they release that water back into the river during the dry season, which artificially raises the level of the river. And there are numerous ecological issues with that as well. We'll talk about some here during our presentation. Ian Baird is going to take a deeper dive into that during his presentation with some more recent results from a very recent study. But this particular dry season, there were fewer releases out of China, far fewer than previous years. And China's got the 2 biggest dams. Those dams are huge. They're much larger than any of the other dams. In fact, you've got to combine many of the lower dams to
approach it.
Exactly, to equal what one of those dams in China can do. And those impacts translate all the way downstream. So when China's dam actions are muted or less than previous years, then their impacts will be muted. And you tend to have a better outcome or a closer to normal outcome. So at the end of the dry season, the dark blue lines are the levels of reservoirs. This is the level of the reservoirs at the end of the dry season. The light blue line is where the reservoir started at the beginning of the dry season. So you might see something interesting, that the largest dam in the system, Nuozhadu, which is a little bit larger than Shaowan in terms of its usable water or active storage, it started at a very low point. And that means it just didn't fill so much during the 2023 wet season. And it didn't fill so much because China's been having this drought during the wet season. There just wasn't water there to take into the reservoir. So it started from kind of a weak position, and it just didn't release that much water. Now, hydropower developers probably cry and lament about that. But the downstream, those of us who watch the Mekong think this is more of a positive outcome, because when that dam is really full and it releases a lot of water, it can be very impactful to the downstream. Also, across some of the other dams, you can see that they started at lower than normal levels, and they didn't release all of their water. The lower dams release much larger portions of water, but they didn't release all of their water. So relatively low releases across the course of the dry season, particularly from the largest dams. And what this did is it created outcomes in Changsan and the Golden Triangle and in Vientiane and around Nakhon Phanom that were close to the long-term normal. Now, the closer you get to the impacts of some of the larger dams in Laos that indeed did have normal releases, then you begin to see their impacts show up. So to interpret these charts, the blue line that you see is the long-term average. That's how the river should run under normal conditions. The top of the bars, that's how much water is observed at the gauge. That's what really flowed downstream. So you can see at Changsan, the two matched by and large. A little bit more water normally in December and May at Changsan compared to what actually happened. But the core dry season months were somewhat close to normal. The river would have, we think the river would have run at very low natural levels if the dams weren't actually releasing water. And that's an interesting find we'll come back to in a bit. But then at Nakhon Phanom, we begin to see the impacts of dams in the center of this map, like the Tin Hun Bun expansion, the Nam Tun 2, the Nam Nung 1, the Nam Nung 2. These are large dams in Laos. And what they're doing is they're raising the level of the river higher than that long-term average. So you're starting to see those bars peak up above that long-term average. And then again, the farther we get downstream,
The more the compounded impact.
right?
So you start seeing the consequences of all the dams and how they're affecting basically the base flow, which is way above what it naturally would be in the dry season.
So much so that at Stum Trang, when you get the impacts of China's dam releases, what we call the Core Lao dams, 3S dams, Thailand's dams, March levels were 46% higher than normal. April's were 60% higher than normal. They were much higher than what the natural flow would have given. But still, even with these lower than normal releases out of China, the river levels at Stum Trang began to go up above normal. Now, compare that to 2022. So 2024 was a relatively low year compared to recent years. 2022 is an example of what can happen when wet season reservoir storage is robust. So we fear that this coming wet season could be like that, given that the weather predictions for the coming wet season say this one should be wetter than previous years. The purple on the 2022 maps, that's just the power of China's dams to lift the level of the river, sometimes tripling flow at Changsan and doubling flow at Stum Trang in Cambodia. That's the combined effects of all of those dams. But again, comparing the 2 years to each other, 2024 again looks much closer to normal than what 2022 was. In 2022, normal is a hard word, right? We live in the new normal now. where dams tend to release a lot of water during the dry season and really lift up the level of the river. 2022 is an example of a typical dry season given the influence of dams, and the ecological impacts of those high river levels during the dry season are severe. We put out a spotlight in April that showed how the levels in the flooded forest were somewhat closer to normal compared to previous years, but still about 60 centimeters higher than what a normal year would be. And again, we saw that's 60% higher than the long-term average.
And
during
it's pulsing up sometimes when there's a major release.
Sure.
And then it can pulse up a meter even. And which should normally remain dry, all of a sudden is flooded even for a short period of time.
Yeah, those fluctuations that we see do hit the flooded forest. But what you're seeing here in the satellite images are 2010. The image there is actually what the flooded forest in Cambodia should look like. Very dry, very narrow river channel. We're seeing like a 10-kilometer long, 2-kilometer wide area here. 2024, not quite 2010, right? 2022, one of these higher than the very high years. You can see the difference between 2022 and 2024. But to achieve a healthy ecology of the Mekong, healthy ecology of the flooded forest, river levels should be what they look like in 2010 at that normal level. And something else that we're concerned about is we're able to isolate the impacts of dams. So we can look at a gauge and we can remove the impacts of dams. And during the dry season, that means to remove the releases for hydropower production. And when you can remove the releases, then we can estimate what natural flow would have been. We can do that because we think the releases are part of wet season flow from the previous wet season. So that's unnatural water. That's old water.
That's been held up and then being released artificially at a time of the year when that water shouldn't be there.
Right. So when we isolate that and we take them out, then we can say this is how much flow would have come downstream during the dry season. And we think we've discovered something interesting, that 2023 natural flow is much lower than these long-term means. And that's at a time before dams were having their impacts, 1960 to 2007 in the Golden Triangle, 1910 in Cambodia, all the way to 2007. A lot of that has to do with low natural flow levels coming out of China. Now, is that a result of, say, a wet season effect from the wet season before? It snowed less during that previous wet season, so there's less snow to melt and contribute into the river. Is there a glacial effect there? Is something else happening? This needs to be further studied, and we encourage those of you that are into the data to get into this issue. Or is it part of a long-term trend? If it is, then I think that's something that's very concerning.
Mm-hmm.
So Alan, we're going to now shoot forward into the wet season.
Okay, so now we're working in pretty much contemporary time. You can see some dates up there that are not very long ago, just the end of May going into just a few days ago into June 8th. And so the end of May is generally that transition time. Sometimes the dry season is prolongs a bit longer. Sometimes the wet season starts in April. But May is the time when you want to start seeing some good wetness. And we know, and I don't have them up here, but if you remember, April and early part of May were some of the warmest and driest on record. Extreme values in much of Laos, parts of most of Northeast Thailand and Cambodia. So we had the extreme drought in the lower basin. And we were encouraged. We were encouraged by the May 19th to 25th. A lot of those red anomalies disappeared. It started looking blue. We started seeing some good wetness in northern Laos as well. Some good storms coming across. Thailand looked much better, even though there's dryness to the north of the Tonle Sap Lake. Most of them have actually gone away, but they came back. They came back on May 26 and June 1. And this is where we started going, We see a lot of wetness up in the headwaters, and that's encouraged. That water needs to come down, but it's not right now because it's being used to fill Nuozhadu. And which, yeah, if you want to go there for a second, you can. And so this is a lot of water that should be coming into the lower basin from all that wetness we saw in the headwaters. Instead, it's being used to fill Nuozhadu very quickly. So you're seeing a rise of, I'm not sure how much, but I think around a meter or so.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
It's
even
about
more.
18 meters.
Wow. So a huge pulse of that water that we saw in excess anomalies in the headwaters is being used to fill in the lake that hardly filled last year. So I guess this year they're going to make sure it gets filled.
Yeah.
And they're not going to miss this opportunity of getting all that water. But that water should be coming down and should be starting the wet season, should start the pulse, and the basically the flood pulse in the lower basin and should be the precursor of actually the reversal. It's
Right.
only a month away, but that water is not going to get down and the river's not going to receive it and start pulsing upward as it should at this time of year.
Yeah, like what you're seeing on that red line is extremely unusual and extremely anomalous.
And early.
Very early.
I mean, this is just the beginning of the wet season, and they're already making sure that lake is going to get filled.
The reservoir, yeah.
Yeah, the reservoir.
And you can see most of the filling happens from July to October. It
Normal.
never
Those
filled
gray
like this
lines, yeah.
before.
Yeah.
Well,
They didn't let it fill last year, so they're going to make sure it fills this year.
Right. And this is a big moneymaker for China, right? This is the largest dam in the system. If it's not performing, like the investors want it to perform,
or they have a voice. Their voice has been heard.
Right. Much to the detriment of the downstream.
At a time when it needs it right now, because you see those dry. Let's go back to those dry anomalies, and the one before, because you can see that and I was talking about May 26th to June 1, but let's go to the most recent map. This is one that we just released today. So I mean, talk about near real time, and you can see it's not getting any better. Still some good water up in the headwaters that's going to be used to continue to fill some reservoirs. But outside of that, the areas that we saw as dry in the dry season, it looks like the dry season is still, is being persistent.
Yeah. So this is where we are today. Reservoir levels compared to this time last year. You can compare the beginning of the graph, which is last year, to the end here, are higher than the last year.
Considerably.
Most of that has to do with Nuozhadu's kind of anomalous filling over the last month. But some of the other reservoirs are higher. They're going to go up, right? And what's
the trend?
To what detriment, Alan?
Well, it depends on how much water is coming in, how wet it is, how much rain's coming right now. And I've been noticing it over most of the dry season that what's been dominant has been the trade winds coming off the South China Sea and coming into Vietnam, bringing good moisture to Vietnam, but being rained out over the highlands of Vietnam and then coming down dry into Laos, into Cambodia, into Thailand. And the Gulf of Thailand has been shut down. The moisture coming in from the south has been largely shut off. So what we need to see is we need to start seeing that the monsoon is truly intact and that the trade winds weaken and a southerly flow comes out of the Gulf of Thailand to feed the monsoon rains that normally occur at this time of year.
The pulse is very low right now. It's actually within normal range. It's very hard to see the green band, but
it's at the bottom.
But we're at the bottom. That pulse is going to start to rise. The peak is going to start to rise over the coming weeks. One of our major concerns is how the largest two dams are going to operate. And we have some advice for those dam operators because how those dams operate impact the pulse. What's our advice?
Well, we've seen, and actually this is an encouraging sign. There is climate change. I've been studying climate for 40 years or more, and there are, we need to look at trends. And a trend that we're starting to observe is that the end of the wet season is prolonged. So that means storing water at the end of the wet season is a viable option with some level of confidence. Because right now they're pulling water back at the beginning of the wet season, which is undermining the natural pulse of the river and bringing in the larvae and bringing in the spawn and flooding the Tonle Sap Basin. And our concern is that we're not going to see that normal rise, that normal pulse, because of restrictions upstream and the drought that we're seeing in the lower basin.
So we're going to end there. Our advice is for the largest dams to hold off. If the La Nina predictions are true, then it's possible, and there's forecasting that you can look into to demonstrate this further, that the end of the wet season will be wet. Give the system a chance, give that pulse a chance to take off, give the Tonle Sap an opportunity to expand. And there are ways to have the ecology work and also
A win-win scenario where basically the water's there for the beginning of the dry season, but it's also there for the beginning of the flood season to maintain the integrity and the fisheries and the quality of life of everyone that depends upon it.
So that's our presentation. Happy to come back to questions, and we're really excited to hear the presentations from Ian Baird, from Soilak and Uluvat. Thanks, Courtney.
Yes, thank you both. So we're going to complement that, data heavy conversation that Alan and Brian brought to the table here with 3 perspectives from colleagues and friends who are working on the ground in the region. So we're going to start things off with a presentation by Dr. Ian Baird, who's sort of a longtime colleague and friend of our program, and who we were delighted to provide a little bit of support to as he was doing some on-the-ground engagement in many locations around the river system from Chiang Rai down to northeastern Cambodia. So Ian, I'll go ahead and turn things over to you.
Okay, sure. I'll try to do this here. I'm just a little bit of to try to figure out how to bring this up properly. Not sure why it's not. Sorry, I'm just trying to.
You were hovering over it there. Keep going down a bit. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but it didn't. Oh, okay. Now it's going. Okay. Okay, good. Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, so I'm going to give a brief presentation. There'll be a longer version of this being presented at another day. But for now, I just want to give a shorter version of this presentation, focusing on just a couple of the aspects of recent research that I've been doing with villagers along the Mekong, from Chiang Rai in northern Thailand down as far as Stung Treng in northeastern Cambodia. And so this was done focusing on the dry season and looking at changes over the last 20, 30 years. So basically, in the month of March, primarily, beginning in the very end of February up to the very beginning of April and throughout March, we visited with colleagues of mine 32 villages in north and northeastern Thailand, 9 villages in Champasak province in southern Laos, and 3 villages in Stung Treng province in northeastern Cambodia. And basically, in each of those villages, we would meet with a group of people who have a lot of experience with the river, usually people who are a little bit older so they can compare with the past, but not so old that they wouldn't be still living with the river and having a chance to see how things are going at present. So, like I said, I'm not going to give all the results. There's a lot of very interesting things that we learned from this. I'm going to focus on, because I only have a few minutes to present this, so I'm going to focus on a couple of important aspects that came out of this. But before that, I just want to say these are the major things that overall local people along the villages are saying in almost every village. They're saying like they're noticing all down the river daily water level fluctuations due to water releases from dams. This is something that everyone talks about along the river in the dry season. They're noticing a change in the color and turbidity of the Mekong River. And I'll come back to that. That's really what I'm going to be focusing a bit more on today. And also changes in water levels during the dry season. That's the other thing I'll focus on today, and and how those last two are kind of linked to each other. So one of the big issues that came out during the study was, is there more or less water in the Mekong River during the dry season compared to 20, 30 years ago before they were dams. And, we had done research the previous year in Stondrang, in which there's very clearly a lot more water in the dry season, and we've heard about that a little bit earlier. And this dry season, we also heard that and observed that when we were there. But in the upper level in Chiang Rai and then down in Luri province, they also say that there's more water in the dry season than there used to be. But what the interesting thing is actually that and this is just down in Ubon Ratchathani. This is just to show how the flooded forest is dying. This is over in a 5-year period between about 9 years ago and 4 years ago. This is the change that's occurred in the flooded forest dying. This is provided by a man who lives in Ubon Ratchathani province, who in Kemarat, who took those 2 photographs of the same location, over that 5-year period. So I'm not going to go into this a lot because I presented a little bit more about how the flood forests are dying due to the more greater. But why is it that people think that there is? I want to come back to the levels of water. So in the upper levels, right? So up here in Chiang Rai, and then down here in Luri, everybody thinks that there's more water in the dry season. But if you go from here, from about Nong Khai province, all the way down to about Amnat Jalern, around here, almost everybody there thinks that there's less water in the dry season. And then if you go from Ubon all the way down and into southern Laos, all the way to Stung Treng, everybody says there's more water. So the question is, when we heard this, we were very surprised. Why? How could there be more water above, less water in the middle, and then more water down below, right? It didn't make sense, right? And we were thinking on people, but this wasn't just like one group of villagers saying this, right? This was village after village after village. People that have a lot of experience along the river were basically saying the same thing. And we had a lot of heated discussions about this. And we also learned that there's been debates between villagers. Those in Ubon have been debating with those in Nakhon Phanom and Nong Khai about this issue, with the people in Ubon saying, of course there's more water in the dry season. The people in Nong Khai saying, no, there's less water. And so this has been a debate that's been happening amongst people along the Mekong River. And so we spent a long time thinking about this, what's going on here. And finally, we have some data and we've talked to other people, hydrologists, and we think we have a sense of what's happening now. And I'll go through a little bit of that. So firstly, I want to show you some data that we received from the Thai government regarding turbidity. And they've been collecting this data. So in the early 1990s is the blue, and the early 2000s. We got 3 years. So this is like 1990, 91, 92 combined, and 2020, 21, 22 combined. Okay, and you can see how much sediment was coming down the river in the early 1990s, especially in the rainy season. Not so much in the dry season, but it does mainly come in the rainy season. And then how much is coming now in the rainy season? That's in Cheng San, okay? Then if you go down to Nong Khai, it's a little bit different. I mean, you still see a substantial decline in the amount of sediment, but not quite as much as we see in Cheng San, that's farther down from the dams in China, right? Which probably has something to do with that. And then we get down to Kongjiam, where you can see that it's a really substantial decline there, even more so than Nong Khai. And again, exactly, why this is happening, it will take more work, but there's no doubt that there's a lot less sediment coming down. And it's, what it looks like to me is, 90% or more or less than and that's what people are saying, that there's a lot less sediment. Now, why is there less sediment coming? Well, the reason primarily are the dams in China that are holding back, sediment. And we can see that in Cheng San, that there's a huge reduction in sediment coming down the river because of the dams that are blocking that sediment. However, there's another issue that has also emerged, and that's the question of sand mining. And sand mining is increasingly occurring on various parts of the Mekong. And people are pumping sand out primarily for construction, sometimes for road construction, building construction, other types of construction, and this is a major issue in certain areas. But I want to explain that what we think is happening is this. If you're up in Chiang Rai, it's very rocky, the river, and there's very little sand mining that occurs there. In fact, maybe no concessions at all as far as we understand. The sediment is very the sand grain size is very small and not very suitable for construction, so people don't want it, and there's not much sediment in the river now because of the dams anyway, and we observed that during our trip. But then if you go down farther, about at Non Khai, down through Nakhon Phanom and all the way down to Amnat Jalern, it's largely sand, very little rock, and there's a huge number of sand mining operations along the river there. And then when you get down to Ubon, it gets rocky again, right? You start getting all these rocky areas, and again, less sand mining. And it so happens that these rocky and sandy areas almost perfectly coincide with what villagers, whether they think there's more water or less water. In places where they think there's more water, it's always rocky. In places they say there's less water, it's always sandy. And recently, I was just in Vientiane a few days ago, and I visited and spent some time with a sand mining operation there just north of Vientiane. And the owner of that operation, who's been working there for over 30 years, he explained that when he started in the early 1990s, there was 6 meters of sand right in front of where he did his operation after the end of each rainy season. Now there's 80 centimeters at the end of each rainy season. So what we see is a huge reduction of sand sort of buildup within that part of the Mekong. And as a result of that, basically the river is getting deeper. So if you had, let's say, 1 meter higher of water due to dams, or that there was more water, and the water you normally have 1 meter higher. But if the bed of your river is 2 meters deeper, let's say on average, that would mean that if you were observing the river and you were looking at certain points in the river, how high the water is, you would think that there is less water in the river, because the level of water would go down even though there was more water in the river. So we think that's what's happening, that this is mainly erosion that's occurring down the bottom of the river that's causing it to become deeper. And even though there's more water in the river, there's a perception that people have along that stretch that there's less water. So this is we think it's mainly due to the dams, but sand mining could also be contributing to it, right? In terms of reducing, there's less sediment now, and that's being removed more than before, and there's also less to begin with. So the combination of those two, with dams being the primary issue and sand mining being a secondary issue, we think are the main reasons why this is happening. And so in the end, the local people are right. Even though their answers seem contradictory, they actually they all have good observations. It's just that they didn't, the people in the middle may not realize how much deeper the river is becoming because of the reduction of sand, because that's not something that they're not mining sand themselves. They're not measuring the depth of the sand in the middle of the river, right? So basically, I won't go on too much longer here, but basically in conclusion, we can say here that turbidity levels in the Mekong have declined dramatically since the 1990s, primarily due to dams holding back sediment. Sand mining is also contributing to this problem of reduced sediment, but there are not much data. So one thing I've also learned recently is that neither the Thai government nor the Lao government are collecting statistics regarding how much sand is being removed. There's no statistics for neither country is collecting that data. And in Cambodia and Vietnam, they are collecting it, but there seems to be a lot of evidence to suggest that what they're recording is a much smaller number, much less than they're actually. I mean, they're recording the amount that they're getting as being much less than what it actually is. That there's a huge problem with the data that's being and this, I've talked to people working in Cambodia and Vietnam who've confirmed that for me. And so these changes in sediment are making it appear as if there is less water in the Mekong, especially in parts of the river where there used to be a lot of sand, and now it's getting deeper because of that, and it's giving the impression to people that there's less water in places where there's lots of rock. It can't go down because it's bedrock, right? And therefore people notice that the water's higher. And so this is basically what we're seeing here. There's obviously more research that needs to be done on this important topic, and we're going to continue working on it. But what we can see happening is pretty major changes in the river. And this is just, I've only focused on a couple of the interesting things. There's lots of other interesting things that we found out that I haven't had time to deal with today, but I will be presenting more about that in a separate session in future months with Stimson Center. So thank you. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much for that, Ian. And I think it really does highlight sort of the need to look beyond one particular focus on data collection. So much of our conversation focuses around the water only, but we have to look at the sediment, we have to look at the fisheries, we have to look at all of the other aspects of how the river system is interacting and how that matches or doesn't match with what people are observing on the ground and why it matters for sort of their local livelihoods and observations. So thank you for that, Ian. I think we're going to change tacks just slightly for our final two comments of the night. We're going to welcome two presentations that are really more focused on early warning and sort of how to get information to local communities and what type of information they need. So we're going to start that sort of final portion of our presentation with a brief presentation from Dr. Ulavan Sinsampan, who's the assistant professor and head of postgraduate division at the Faculty of Environmental Science at the National University of Laos. So Ulavan, I'm delighted to turn things over to you, and then we'll wrap up with comments from our Cambodian colleague and expert.
Thank you very much, Courtney, and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to give me a chance for today's session. So my name is Ulavan. I'm happy to share with you for the climate situations in Laos and also their early warning system, particularly in the vulnerable communities in Laos. Allow me to share my screen. I'm going to have few presentation to show you for the situations. I'm not sure that I can share screen for my side, Courtney.
I believe you should have permission to do so, Ulavan, but I will double check with our colleagues on the comms team. You should be able to just click the share button. If you're having issues, if it's simply giving you trouble and not letting you, Ulavan, if you want to email the PowerPoint to me, then you can go ahead and get started on the content and I can try to share it in a moment.
Sure. I'm sending you now.
Or we could reverse order and have Srelak go first.
Sure, actually, why don't we do that? And that way we can make sure I have it in hand so that it'll match with your presentation. If you don't mind with that, Ulavan, we can have
sure.
Srelak go first, and then that way we can get you ready to go.
Sure. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
thank you for that. Yes, it's good to me go first because I close to the departure time. Hi, Connie again, everyone. My name is Lea, and thanks for having me to be present about the how to share information for actionable and accountable to the community in Tonle Sap. So may I share my screen for the slide presentation? Oh, they also, but last time I can share, but now it's say like I could not share while the other participant is sharing.
Yes, I'm getting the same notification if I try to share my screen. Very strange.
Let's see if we can cancel share screens from our communications access side in case something just didn't close out properly.
I see at the top of my screen, it says Ulawan is sharing computer sound. So I'm wondering if that's blocking other things.
Huh.
That's what it says at the top of my screen. Oh, now it's gone.
Now it's gone too. And I can share my screen. So I think we can
Yeah,
now
yeah,
share
no, I
screen.
can share. Yeah.
All right, Srelak, over to you.
Okay. Okay. So have you seen my screen?
We can see it well. Yes.
So again, my name is Australia, and I work for Mekong Regional Water Governance Program in Oxfam. And today I'm feeling delighted to share with you about the study that we call co-design for actionable and accountable data in the Tonle Sap Basin in Cambodia. So I might go roughly because of the time, and if you have any question, you can ask me after, or maybe stop me during the presentation. So coming to the outline of, first I'm gonna go through the context and objective and research design, finding and recommendation. So for this activity, we have working closely and with Carl Middleton, and he is the professor at Chulalongkorn University, and also with the two students from Royal University of Phnom Penh in Cambodia, who start doing the research. And the context of this, we found like people in the community of Tonle Sap, they face hardship to get the information, and also the information is not automatically translated into the action. So we're coming up with three layers of knowledge, information, and data. So for the data, we think that people getting the data, and then they translate into the information that they get. And after the information should be the knowledge that they respond to the change. And the objective of this study, you might see all of the activity, like most of the activity or digital or platform that just created, it's designed from the top to the ground. But we want to emphasize to design from the bottom up, from the community, and then we observe the community and we go into the community, what is existing, how they share the information, and is there any information that actionable, and how they share it to another people, and where is the mechanism of the community. So we have two side study. Maybe some of you heard about the Kampong Pluk and Bap Pria fishery community, and it is located in Battambang province and Siem Reap province. Basically, both community is the fishery community, and their livelihood is rely on fishery. And Kampong Pluk community is in Siem Reap. It's a bit different. Their livelihood also can get it from ecotourism. So the information about the weather and seasonal flow change is very important to them. While they have challenge during they bring the tourism to the river to see the eco and biodiversity in the river, but they have the disaster happen like flash flood and heavy rain, so they didn't get that information in advance. So they worry in the future if it still happen again, they might be decrease their tourism. And for the design thinking, we come up with 5 steps. One is emphasize, define, and idea, and also prototype and test. So our action research approach is based on the design thinking methodology, and we initial like how might we include co-design from the bottom up and data sharing system that meet the local need for receiving, and they can acting up on those information that they get it in the Tonle Sap community. Please stop me if I'm speak a bit fast. Is that okay? Or
I think you're doing okay for now, yeah.
okay. Yeah, so we combine with the local knowledge. Voice, as I mentioned before, we didn't bring the like very fancy digital or platform for communities to choose, but we work with them to define which one is accessible for them and workable, that they can understand and they can take the action to respond to the emergency in terms of disaster and also the chain of the river that affect to their livelihood. So what we mean by co-design, so we take into consideration about the local challenge, also the need, and how we design the platform address the need and challenge of the community. So both community have a chance to discuss with us and also with Dr. Kal, and we have the key finding that both community have limited access to the information. So it is less of a clear mechanism for circulating external information, such as weather and seasonal flow and early warning system. For early warning system in Cambodia, we have the national system, which is called Early Warning System 1294, that is operated by National Committee for Disaster Management and also supported by people in need organizations. And this system is also like nationwide in 25 cities and provinces in Cambodia. But when we go to these two community, they are less access or less awareness about the system, as the system is also face challenge in terms of raise awareness to the Tonle Sap community. So we're thinking of this also important. And community also raise about the self-migration. As you know about when the dry season is coming, less water. So in community, they understand about less water, less people. And when the water is coming back, people is coming to celebrate and do the festival. And information about the flow from the head of the village does not cover the whole community. They use only word to word and also call to the phone number to the community member that they know. But if they could not access to them based on the network, those people or most vulnerable people cannot access to those information. And we didn't heard about people mention of the information they got from the television and also the radio, but they mentioned mostly on the social media, especially Facebook. And the source of information, we also heard that they mentioned about Ministry of Water Resource and Meteorology. And you see the picture is the group discussion. So people, they vote for which one is the source of sharing information that is accessible for them and can reach more people. For example, people who live far away from the community center. So it's hard for them to get those information. And I was very surprised of this. You can see this century is returning to very digital platform, but people at there still vote for the public speaker. The reason is they said they no need to search for the information. If the community chair get those information, they can just share through the public speaker. And it would be helpful if those public speaker is the mobile one. So they can drive along the river and also go to reach more people who live very far from the community center or next to the commune chair. And those information is they also vote for which information that helpful for them in terms of initiative their livelihood. One is accessible, is the short term of meteorology data. And also most community members suggest that even with the changing lake condition, seasonal data is not essential. For example, when they get the information from the social media, but they didn't get like the specific information about their area or any the village mentioned the specific best early warning. So they think it is not impact much to them, and it's hard for them to decide the action that they need to respond to the change. So we have two design thinking inside. One is meteorological and seasonal data to be more accurate and location specific. And one more is some community member prefer record meteorological update by MORAM instead of the written and visual update. Recently, Ministry of Water Resource and Meteorology, they also have the voice with the letter of dissemination. So people, they just open the voice record and then they can listen accordingly, even though they could not read through that. And we have 3 initial points for action. One is public announcement that we call a public speaker that announce those information which is important for the village and inclusive for all members that could access to those information. And also the more effective use of existing online resource that we have, the weather and also the other app that already implements. And also access to information on safe migration. Most of them, they first challenge when they go for migration, for example, to Thailand or to another country that they didn't know clearly about the safe migration. So they mentioned if they can have a linkage to the safe migration for example, like ILO in Thailand. So when they face any problem in terms of legal, they can reach out to them to seek for support. And we also have the recommendation for action, which is a bit long term, and they need the like coming together, like have the right people or CSO that who working on the early warning system and also the forecasting to work together to find the solution. One is the strengthening seasonal forecasting of local location specific interlaced level, which is can tell actually where is the, for example, like the storm coming, and also where is the safe side for them in terms of evacuation. And also strengthening disaster warning, as I mentioned that even though we have early warning system 1294, which is nationwide early warning system in Cambodia, but we need more to raise awareness and reach the most of people who live along the river. So when they have any disaster happen, they can get those information. And also design a phone app for the Tonle community. This is the long term that we is thinking of. We can take action, but the initial action is still the public speaker, which is our project gonna focus on in the next following month. And also we improve the water data apps that already have. We don't know how much we can do or touch with that, but we try to bring the community can be access to the app that already have. Some of them also mentioned about the weather app, but most of like elderly people or people who first challenge to use the smartphone or social media, they had to install the app and sometimes they delete because the phone is full. So it's back to the public speaker. It's less it's cut down a lot of challenge of people access to information. It is controlled by the commune chef, and also we can share those information that is important to the community. And the last one is improve access to reliable and trust information on work opportunity. For example, we're gonna research or do more potential on partnership with organizations that promote safe work that could be suitable contact point to send information to community leader, and we can linkage them, for example, providing training to the community on safe migration, so they can have such the basic information when they have the problem or challenge in the another country when they go to work. So it's all from my side. I hope it might be helpful to everyone for design any digital platform or any app that have the community. So we could not bring very fancy ones and we bring to the community and it does not work because they doesn't have, their knowledge is limited and they feel it's not easy, and sometimes about the barrier from the inclusive angle, the language, and also it is very technical and it is very first hardship for people to get the information. For example, the early warning system in Cambodia, we just use the non-touch screen phone, like the traditional one. In the previous time, they just get the information by the phone call. So they just register to that and they get the information without no spending any cost. So it is the one of the system that can like cut down the challenge to get those information, for example. And also the public speaker that is very trustful and it is disseminated by the leader chat. So people are gonna more trustful and they easy to get the information and can share with their family and neighbor.
Thank you. I think that really helps to highlight the need to focus on the local communities and the local needs here. So I'm going to go ahead and get Dr. Ulavan's presentation ready to go so we can wrap up with some additional comments on early warning in Laos. So Ulavan, please go ahead and start and you'll see this share screen for me in just a moment.
Thank you very much. Yeah, like I mentioned today, I would like to share on behalf of the academic, and I have been working with the Department of Social Welfare regarding to the disaster and early warning system in order to capacity to the local communities and also the local authority from the village to the district and province regarding to the disaster risk management. Can you go for next slide? As you have know well about Laos, that because of the geography and the location is the mountainous, mainly in along the country, and it is more vulnerable on the climate change, particularly for the flood, drought, and heavy storm that we have 2 seasons for the rainy and dry seasons. So mainly during the dry seasons, you can see as the previous slide, previous presenter have showed to us like the impact from the drought affected to the local people along the Mekong River. And Laos has been realized a lot on the Mekong River along the Mekong. We have 13 river tributary. So people are living along the river in order to get the water access for agriculture. So when the threat of the climate change is impact to the drought and to the flood during the year, and also is associated with the landslides that impact to the vulnerable communities, particularly in the mountainous area. So I can say that the hydrometeorology hazard from the greatest risk is threaten the local livelihood due to the local communities. They are not strong in infrastructure and living along the river. So they have been impacted by their social livelihood and also economics. So it is like most vulnerable area in the country is the lowland and the highland along the Mekong River. And in the graph showing that the affected people from the hazard risk from the flood is the highest affected populations. Yeah, by last survey. Can you go next slide, please? As you have seen that climate projections from many scientists and many organizations has been predict that climate change in Laos has already increased and in the regions. So we have since a lot of the study mentioned that by 2050, the climate will be increased to 2 or 3 degrees Celsius, which will be impact for the increase of the temperature, which is causing more drought, like a longer drought, and also increase the rain as we have concern, and exposed flood will be project along the regions, and it's gonna be increased and impact more for the flooding and landslide, particularly the flood in the northern part of Laos. Like some example that I have shown here for the picture of the flood in Laos. Can you go next slide? Yes, there's some example that the geography of Laos is the mountainous area, and some in the southern part is the lowland. So whenever we have a heavy rainfall or the tropical storm from China, from Vietnam and Thailand, we will be affected by the flood, and it will be causing to the landslide also. So this is high risk and vulnerable to the local communities as they are living along the river and they are in the poor communities conditions. So it is very difficult for them to cope with the early emergency response and also recovery. That is the situations in the rural area of Laos. And even you can see recently that from your observation, maybe the number of flood or number of rain is increasing day by day. Last 2 days that the heavy rain in the Vientiane capital, it is causing the flood in the city area, which is like causing by the road improvement or the waste stocking in the canal. It make the city flood. That also one of the challenge for the flood management in the city. Can you go next slide? Yes, this is the few days ago that I also facing with this situation when I stuck in the middle of the road. That heavy rains came and the water sudden come to the road and is causing a lot of impact to the motorbike and to the car that they not able to be in these situations. Can you go for next slide? And therefore, as you may aware that for the flood response or rescue in Laos is still limited in terms of the facilities, in terms of the equipments. However, the government trying to involve all the stakeholders who have supported to the flood response and rescues. Mainly, we have the military team who is always readiness for supporting the local communities in terms of the flood release, and also the Red Cross that they are working hard to support the local communities in terms of the emergency response, and also the community themselves. They have been strengthened by the government, and we have trying to develop the disaster risk management of the province. Therefore, they will have that kind of technique or procedures to implement during the flood. And we try our hard to coping as much as possible. However, we still, compared to others developed country, we still weak in terms of the facilities and response. Can you go for next slide? And I would give some example for the early warning system in the communities that I have been working with them. In order to measure the flood level or the water level, in Laos, the Department of Hydrometeorology, they try to install the hydrology station in the main river. But however, there is very limited from the small tributary of the river. So we try to giving the information or knowledge to the local communities to enhance them to know how to measure the water by making like a flood mapping or install the measurements materials to let them observe by the local communities and the leaders in order to notice to the local authority, like in the social welfare department or hydrometeorology department in the district and provincial level. So it is very basic information that local community that they have to participate or involve for the flood observation. And we have the speaker in every house, every village. This is very basic equipment that they put for the early warning system for when we have noticed that the level of the water is increased, and with how many meter high that the local village have to announce to the local communities. So this is also one of the equipments that local communities still using in rural area of Laos. So it is helpful for them to notice everyone rather than they are using the mobile phone, because some area they don't have the connection, or they're not able to have the mobile device to receive the information. So this is the basic needs and very necessary for the communities to have the village speaker. So the local leader, they will announce, and on the local people in the community, they will hear from this speaker. And after that, they will associate with the district authority at the natural resource or hydrology people to respond for this one. It is like a bottom-down approach. However, we still have the top-down approach, which is announcing from the central government. Can you go for the next slide? Yes. In terms of the disaster preparedness and risk reductions management, in Lao government, we have the structure of the committees for the National Disaster Management Committee led by the Deputy Prime Minister. And each ministry will have action in terms of the mandate. And mainly the focal point will be social welfare and to response. And they have connected for this one in terms of the big disaster. Can you go for next slide? Yes. Regarding to this, there is the system that we have right now, that early warning system and risk communication, getting the information from Department of Meteorology and Hydrology, and then they will compare with the disaster monitoring and response. And this information will deliver to the province committee to announce and calling to the district and village in order to receive the information and announcing. And mostly we get this kind of information is about the typhoon and the heavy rain during the rainy season, to be aware and let the people not to take the risk during the heavy rain and the rainy seasons. And information will go to the village disaster committee and they will announce. This one also one of the approach that we are doing in the top-down approach. Next slide, please. So there is a early warning emergency operation center. This one is set up by supported by the UNDP to the social welfare department, and I am a part of the facilitator to provide the training to the local committees by having the installation of this operation center in order to receive and transfer the data to the province committee, as I mentioned at last structure of the emergency and early warning system. And regarding to the AHA or the ASEAN, we are the member of the AHA Center, and we have strengthened by the ASEAN and Sendai framework that to have the standard of operation procedures for the flood and early warning system. So Lao government trying to strengthen the capacity of the committee at the province level to be a part of the National Disaster Management Committee. Next slide. And recently, there are more projects supporting to Lao government in terms of the strengthening the capacity, coping with the flood management. And there are many project support, especially the local communities getting support a lot from the Red Cross and from like the flood, what they call post-flood and drought recovery guideline. And I have here with me is the disaster recovery guideline that funded from the several sources of the donor to the social welfare department. And recently, I have been conduct the comprehensive multi-hazard and vulnerable and risk assessment for the flood and the disaster in Laos. Next, please. Yeah, and some legal guidelines and framework that Laos has implemented. And we try to integrate the disaster management into the national socio-economics development strategies.
Thank you,
Yes,
Ulavan. I think we're getting a little bit short on time. Unfortunately, we've had all of
yeah,
really good
that's
presentations.
That's all for my slide. Thank you very much. And we can have more discuss question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I will just note that unfortunately, Lac had to catch her flight, so she wished us a good conversation and is happy to keep in touch on this afterwards. But I think we can move to a couple of questions for discussion now. And I know Brian had sort of flagged that he wanted to prioritize one question right up front. So Brian, I'll go ahead and turn things over to you to ask that question.
Yeah, and this is really for our presenters today. It's something that I struggle with. And, you know, we do a lot of work to promote the value of floods and flooding, looking at the importance of the Tonle Sap expansion during the wet season, looking at other benefits that, say, floods bring for sediment delivery to the delta and how that translates to agricultural production. But at the same time, flash floods are increasing. Whether it's from intense weather, whether there are settlements and communities now living in places they weren't living before, so therefore they're more exposed to floods, whether it's a result of something that Ulavan talked about with, say, new road construction blocking the ability of floods to clear, and therefore they back up and they cause more flooding in urban areas. There are a lot of reasons why flooding is actually becoming a risk in the Mekong. So Ian, I just want to pick your brain a bit. You know, what are ways that you think about in the Mekong, how it's important to be able to live with floods, but also recognize that there are indeed some rising risks to flooding in the Mekong Basin?
My sense is that one of the biggest problems is the way that people are now constructing things. You know, in the past, people weren't putting their houses in the middle of wetlands as much, you know, because of increased land prices. People have been forced into more marginal areas. People are used to have houses on stilts. Now they build houses on the ground more. These are all things, you know, so land use and then also, you know, the building of roads, which often blocks natural water flows, and, you know, lack of proper drainage of certain areas. So I think there's a lot of factors that have to do with land use and land use planning, which you know, are actually the main problems with the impacts of flooding. It's not, you know, flooding has been happening for a very long time. It's become a problem because of the way the land is being used now, not so much because, you know, there's more flooding or the flooding is worse. It's because people are moving into places where they're more vulnerable. So I think that these are, and there hasn't been very good planning on this, you know, in most places along the basin in terms of preventing people from living in places that are vulnerable or filling in wetlands. I know a lot in Phnom Penh, in Vientiane, you know, there's been a lot of wetlands that have been filled in, you know, in order to create, and this is, you know, a lack of, this is creating much more flooding problems. So I think that there should be more consideration of land use planning.
Yeah, and one of the trends I see or I hear about is that that when storms do come in, reservoir operators, particularly of smaller reservoirs, they're not ready for them. And it might be the wet season and the reservoirs are high. They don't have much warning prior to, say, draw down your reservoir gradually to get ready for all this new water that's going to rush into your reservoir. So what they do is they do these sudden releases of water, and that also causes flash flooding downstream. And I worry again, I mean, the Mekong really needs floods. That's clear. The people of the Mekong benefit from those floods. All the data says that. But if there's this building discourse that floods are ultimately a bad thing and they need to be controlled, then the mightiness of the Mekong really begins to erode very quickly.
It does concern me that a lot of the projects that are being developed in the region are presenting floods always as a problem. And I think this is a really serious issue, and it's there's not enough appreciation of the benefits of flooding and how flooding has been occurring naturally for a very long time. So I think that this is there needs to be more awareness raised flooding as a benefit, not only because all the productivity of riverbank gardening, of fisheries, of so many aspects of the river are related to flooding and the need for flooding. And yet that's not always. And actually, when we were along the river, that was one of the things that local people talked about. They said the reason there is less fisheries is because there is less flooding. So people who live along the river understand it. They were pointing to less flooding because they say the water doesn't go up as high as it used to in the dry season, in the wet season as it used to, and that this is a problem. This is a problem for the natural productivity of the river.
And Ulavan, when you're there in Vientiane and you deal with and communicate with people every day that both benefit from floods but also are affected by floods, how do you see people in Laos kind of dealing with this? It's a kind of a contradiction of the way that people understand floods.
From my point of view, that the benefit from flood and for the impacted from flood, they are in two type of the group of people. Maybe some kind of people, they are happy to have the water, particularly the farmers who need the water for their agriculture, and they have been waiting a bit long for these seasons. So that people, they will be happy to have the water. However, for the people facing the difficulties during the fast flood in the urban city is the people living along the river, and also the transporters who have not a good qualities of the car. They have been facing, and last 2 days I have seen a lot of car has stuck in the middle of the road, and it caused the traffic jams and like making very difficulties and to get back home during that seasons. And for my opinions to the local communities in the urban spaces, like Aaron's mentioned, that land use planning is more important in order to extend the urbanize and also to manage the city management. That's more important and should be the responsible from the local authority as well, who is living in the same communities, that they also have to be aware before the season's coming. So clean up the canals and making the good environment for the canal flow, river flow. That would also the response from the communities and the local people in the urban area.
Thank you. And just to, we do want to get to a few questions, and we'll end here about 40 past the hour. Just a note on your presentation as well as Lac's presentation, and we've been talking to Ian about how people receive information along the course of the river, and we, via the Mekong Dam Monitor, also issue information and alerts in languages and try to get that information into communities' hands for action. We're hearing the same thing. We're hearing that communities get their information in very different ways and have different preferences. Some beneficiaries of our early warnings say that they hear them from the village loudspeaker. That's the public speaker that Locke mentioned. Others say they get it via social media. Others say they don't get it at all. And that's an issue. But I think what was emphasized that you need to have a multimodal form of communicating alerts, because people have different capabilities, so there are different ages and different levels of being able to absorb and understand the information that's coming at them. There needs to be a multimodal effect. Ian, in terms of your study along the river, what's your understanding for the preference of receiving information, from government sources or from local NGOs or from efforts like the Mekong Dam Monitor?
It seems to me that most of the people that are living along the river, most of them have fairly good internet connectivity compared to those in more remote areas away from the river. And so most of them, I think, get their information through different types of social media. And the thing is that each of the countries primarily uses different forms of social media. So in Thailand, Line is very important, along with Facebook. In Laos, it's WhatsApp is much more important, also Facebook, but WhatsApp as well. And then you go to Cambodia and it's Telegram, right? It's really important there. Also Facebook. I mean, Facebook seems to work everywhere, but it's not the most important in any of the countries. Like it's Telegram, Line, and WhatsApp are the most important in each of those countries. So that's and I think especially for villagers, Line is much more common in Thailand. You really hear there's a lot of Line groups set up, and there's a lot of communication via Line. Whereas in the other countries they don't use Line hardly at all.
Thanks. Hey, Courtney, you've got the difficult job of choosing 2 questions to ask us.
Sure, I'm gonna ask one question, and it's really getting sort of at a continuation of this conversation about how people get information, and then who is able to access different types of information. So one of the things that you were just sharing, Ian, and that we heard is that many people have phones, they get access through apps, they get access through social media. We had one question that was really asking, who doesn't have access to phones? How many people, particularly from those most poor, most vulnerable communities, actually have smartphones where they could get that access? And then at the same time, do those people have sort of the background context of which areas might be most vulnerable to floods when they are choosing where to live? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Ulavan, from the communities that you visited, or Ian might have insights from the communities that he's visited, but how do you see sort of that breakout and sort of that sort of last mile of getting access to people who may not have phones or who may not have data access?
Yeah, thank you, Kenny, for that. And I have seen that question. Let me respond with my experience and my opinion when I have dealing with the local communities. I would bring some example for the poor communities, particularly in the southern part of Laos, that I have just surveyed from the dams collapse communities in Attapeu province. So in the context of the information accessed to the marginalized people, like ethnic communities people, they are very weak in terms of the understanding of the information. When they have receiving the information from the center, they also waiting for the local leaders that's matter for them. The local leaders is like a village leaders who can be guiding them to go for the evacuation center or to move out from the village. So they will rely on the community's leaders. That is the first thing. And to access to the information, like I said, to the vulnerable group of people, they are marginalized. Like, I don't want to say marginalized, but they are kind of the ethnic people who have not high education and not aware of the smartphone. So not everyone having the mobile phone to get reach out. So the speaker at the communities, is the best things that they can be listen and follow the instruction for moving out from the flooding area. And third one, when they have identified the flood mapping, the local community, they will come as the representative, particularly the head of the household. They will join to do the flood mapping, identify, and they will make a location, the high risk location in their communities. And at least they will be aware that where the flood will come and how much level that water come. For example, if the water high in 1 meter, what is the warning? What is like when water come to the 3 meters, what is the warning? So they will have this procedures at the village, and then local people, they will aware. If the water come higher than 5, they will remove out from that village. So this is the local knowledge also, and they have to aware by their practice and their experience that every year flood. Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you for that, Uluvan. And I think we're pretty much at time now. So I do see we have a good number of additional questions. I will happily share those with all of our panelists in case they are able to follow up with those in the audience who had asked some of the specific questions. But in the meantime, I just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight and for staying a little over 10 minutes past the hour for our session. We will, of course, have another of these seasonal updates when it comes back to the dry season. So look out for that update. And in the meantime, we hope to see you interacting with us on the platform, online, and in some of the other social media communities that we have where we share our data and try to make it accessible to everyone. So I would just like to say thank you to all of you for joining. I also want to give a special shout out to Reagan Kwan and the rest of the Eyes on Earth team for all of the work that they do every week to keep our near real-time data in near real time and accessible to all of you. So thank you everyone who contributes to the platform, and thank you all of you for joining us for today's discussion. And we look forward to seeing you in about 6 months.
Thank you.